Usually when you talk about building a life, getting a job, finding a partner, all that stuff, there is this baked in expectation of like a solid foundation.
Right, a baseline.
Yeah, exactly. You pour the concrete, you follow the blueprints society handed you, and you just expect the house to stand. It's supposed to be this very clean equation,
Yeah.
right? You do the right things, you get the stability.
But that's not always the reality people face.
No, it's not. And what happens when you step into the world of modern men's rights advocacy and the red pill philosophy? Suddenly, that solid foundation looks like it was built on a massive, active fault line.
Yeah, you're looking at a sociological and legal landscape that is, well, according to the text we're examining today, actively designed to swallow you whole.
It's intense,
Yeah.
and that is the architecture we are exploring today. So welcome to another extensive, ultra-long, and fascinating deep dive.
Glad to be here for this one. It's a big topic.
It really is.
Yeah.
If you're part of the men's rights activist audience, or if you identify with the red-pilled manosphere, and you are looking to understand the history of our institutions before they were, as today's source material argues, captured by feminists and Marxists, this deep dive is custom built for you.
And, if you're just a curious learner wanting to understand the mechanics of this growing cultural movement, you are absolutely in the right place.
Completely. But before we unpack the ideological concrete of today's material, I urgently need to remind you to hit the like button and subscribe to the show. It's literally the only way we can keep bringing you these massive explorations into the cultural flashpoints shaping our world.
Definitely do that, because today's focus is a comprehensive review of a highly controversial new ebook. It's titled Redpilled Men's Guide to DGAF, OYS, and Self-Improvement by Conrad Riker.
Yeah, and I'm going to tell you right now, to truly understand this worldview, to see the raw data, the citations, the arguments for yourself, you really need to check out Amazon Kindle or Google Playbooks to buy the book.
We can only cover so much ground here, right?
Exactly. Even in a deep dive this extensive, we can't hit every single footnote. So go buy it there, and you should definitely follow the author at Conrad Riker at Substack. We are framing this text today exactly as the author presents it, which is basically as a battlefield manual.
Yeah, written specifically for men aiming to dismantle modern societal delusions. But I think before we get into his survival protocol, we really need to be incredibly clear with you, the listener, about our role today.
Yes. Very important disclaimer here.
Right. This text is highly politically charged. It contains anti-feminist and right-wing content. Our job here is not to endorse these views, nor to take a side, nor to morally litigate his points. We are acting strictly as cartographers.
Exactly that. We're just mapping the architecture of this movement. We are examining the load-bearing pillars of Riker's arguments. The statistics he cites, the history he references, the evolutionary psychology he leverages, just so you can understand exactly how this worldview is constructed, regardless of where you personally sit on the political spectrum.
We just want to understand the why and the how of his philosophy.
Right. So to understand the author's call for self-improvement, which is the entire second half of the book, including those acronyms in the title like DGAF, which stands for Don't Give a F, we first have to understand what he believes men need to improve for.
Or, more accurately, what they need to escape from.
Yeah, exactly. The absolute bedrock of Riker's book is the idea that modern relationships and legal structures are, at their core, an economic trap. He actually refers to this system as the marriage plantation and the gynocratic gulag.
Wow.
Yeah, it's incredibly evocative, aggressive language.
Yeah.
And it's designed to shock the reader out of any romanticized notions they might hold about the institution of marriage.
Well, Riker argues that the introduction of no-fault divorce fundamentally altered the DNA of marriage. If we look at the history, no-fault divorce began sweeping through the U.S. starting in California around, 1969?
1969, yeah.
Right. And before that, to dissolve a marriage, you had to prove a fault. Adultery, abandonment, extreme cruelty. Riker asserts that by removing that requirement of fault, marriage basically transitioned from a binding social and religious covenant into what he explicitly calls a rigged casino.
A rigged casino. Let's look at the numbers he uses to build that metaphor, because he goes heavy on the stats. He claims that 70% of, quote, equal dads lose custody battles. He states that men pay 97% of all alimony awarded.
That's a huge disparity.
Right. And here is a financial metric he highlights using Tax Foundation data. He notes that the average divorced dad works until August 14th every single year just to pay his ex's bills and related court mandates.
August 14th, so everything he earns from January 1st to mid-August.
Belongs to a household he no longer lives in.
Yeah. So when you look at those numbers through Riker's lens, you really grasp his concept of sexual economics. He's actively encouraging his readers to just strip away all the poetry, the romance, the Hollywood narratives about unconditional love.
Right. He wants men to view dating and marriage purely as market transactions.
Yeah. He calls this seeing through the red pill matrix. And the foundational code of that matrix is a biological concept he leans on heavily, which is hypergamy.
Let's define that for the listener real quick. Hypergamy is basically the sociological and evolutionary biology term for marrying or mating upwards in caste or social status or wealth.
Right. And Riker argues that women are biologically optimized to practice hypergamy, to seek the highest status mate with the most resources to ensure the survival of their offspring. Conversely, he argues men are biologically wired to simply acquire resources to attract those hypergamous mates.
But he doesn't just, leave this in the realm of ancient savannas. He maps it directly onto modern technology.
Oh, absolutely. He points to modern dating apps as the ultimate, undeniable proof of hypergamy in action. He cites studies analyzing Tinder's algorithm, claiming it shows a stark Pareto principle where 80% of women on the app are exclusively chasing the top 20% of men.
80% going after the top 20. The mechanism there is fascinating from a sociological perspective.
Yeah.
Because Riker argues that dating apps have basically created a hyper-efficient, frictionless market for hypergamy.
Yeah, because before the internet, a woman's dating pool was limited to her geographic community, right? Her town, her church, her workplace.
Right.
And in that localized market, a man of average means and average looks had inherent value. But Tinder globalized the sexual marketplace. Now, that same average man is competing against the top tier of men across an entire city or region.
So Riker claims this creates this massive inequality curve, essentially a Gini coefficient for dating, where a tiny fraction of men hold all the romantic capital.
Exactly. So he maps out this evolutionary psychology and applies it to modern financial outcomes. He cites Federal Reserve data, arguing that because modern institutions have weaponized these hypergamous instincts against men, through things like divorce courts and alimony, unmarried men actually end up with a 40% higher net worth by age 50.
40%. And his ultimate financial advice in this segment is blunt. He tells men to short this economy.
Short this economy. He's using Wall Street terminology deliberately there. To short a stock means to bet against it because you believe its value will fall. Riker is telling men to literally bet against the traditional relationship market.
Okay, but if the system is a rigged casino, like he says, how does the author suggest counting cards? What are the actual legal loopholes he is advocating for here?
Well, he introduces a concept called the Lovers LLC. He tells this very detailed story about a man named Dave in Miami. Dave is 41, he's twice divorced, and has a net worth of $12 million.
Okay.
But the catch is, it's virtually entirely hidden from domestic family courts.
Wait, how does that actually work mechanically? How do you hide $12 million legally?
According to the book, Dave structured his assets through a complete labyrinth. He uses 3 different domestic limited liability companies, which are then owned by a Panamanian shell company.
How?
Yeah. By doing this, Dave essentially legally divorces himself from his own wealth. On paper, he owns very little. The corporate entities own the assets, and the controlling entity sits outside United States jurisdiction. Dave's quote to the author summarizes this entire ethos. He says, "Alimony's for blue-pilled suckers who think love trumps contract law."
Right. The term blue-pilled, referring to someone who still believes the mainstream narrative, swallowing the comfortable illusion rather than the harsh reality of the red pill. Riker uses billionaires as archetypes for this dynamic too, doesn't he?
He does. He points to Jeff Bezos and Leonardo DiCaprio. Bezos is presented as the ultimate cautionary tale, a man who built an empire but lost 25% of Amazon, which was roughly $38 billion, because he didn't insulate his assets against the reality of hypergamy.
And he contrasts Bezos with DiCaprio, who famously refuses to marry and strictly dates women under a certain age limit. And Riker doesn't moralize DiCaprio's choices at all. He analyzes them strictly through the lens of sexual economics.
Right. DiCaprio understands his extreme value in the hypergamous marketplace and just refuses to sign an asymmetrical contract that would expose his resources to state redistribution.
So Riker's basically arguing that the traditional romantic ideal of, his money is her money and her problems are his problems is an outdated, massive liability. He wants men to operate like ruthless venture capitalists.
Exactly. You wouldn't invest in a failing startup without a bulletproof term sheet, so why would you invest your life's resources in a legal contract where the other party is financially incentivized to break it?
Right. So that establishes his view of the rigged market. But Riker's analysis doesn't stop at the family court doors. He transitions to examining the systemic cultural forces that he believes provide the ideological cover for this legal rigging.
Yeah, he categorizes this cultural force under the term toxic femininity.
This is a major pivot in the book. He moves from individual financial defense to a macro-level cultural critique. He argues there's an entire grievance industry that actively works to suppress male suffering and elevate female victimhood.
He starts by attacking the narrative of male privilege with just a barrage of mortality statistics. He writes that society views male suffering as invisible, using men for labor, as he puts it, like coal from a mine.
Wow.
He cites CDC data showing men commit suicide at 4 times the rate of women. And he cited Occupational Safety and Health Administration OSHA data showing 93% of all work-related deaths are men.
He contrasts these incredibly grim statistics of physical and emotional peril for men with a cultural apparatus that he says focuses almost exclusively on female victimhood. And to track where this narrative imbalance started, the book takes a deep dive into the 1970s, specifically focusing on a woman named Erin Peatsy.
Now, Erin Peatsy is a highly disruptive figure in this context. She was a pioneer who opened Britain's first domestic violence shelter in 1971. She was on the absolute front lines of this issue.
Right.
But Riker focuses entirely on the backlash she faced from the very movement she helped legitimize.
Because of the data she was collecting, right? Riker notes that Peatsy reported that 62% of the women seeking refuge in her shelter actually admitted to initiating the physical violence themselves.
Yeah, they were locked in mutually abusive dynamics, not simply passive victims of a unilateral patriarchy.
And the reaction to that data is what Riker finds so instructive. According to his historical account, the burgeoning feminist movement of the 1970s did not celebrate this nuanced understanding of domestic violence.
Far from it. Instead, Peatsy received bomb threats. She required police protection, and activists actually poisoned her dog, telling her to stop helping male scum.
Riker uses PC to argue that ideological capture started decades ago. The facts didn't matter. The data threatened the victim narrative. If abuse isn't a male monopoly, the foundation of certain feminist ideologies and, crucially, the funding that comes with them, begins to crack.
And he traces that ideological capture right up to modern institutions. He looks specifically at the weaponization of false accusations in universities and the legal system.
He cites the Heritage Foundation, claiming that 72% of Title IX officers, those are the officials handling campus sex discrimination and assault claims, admit to a bias toward accusers before a hearing even commences.
Yeah, and he also points to the National Registry of Exonerations, noting that 83% of wrongful convictions across the board involve men.
This is where we need to introduce a term Riker borrows from the writer Helen Pluckrose. He calls it grievance arbitrage.
Right. Arbitrage in finance is the practice of taking advantage of a price difference between 2 or more markets. Riker believes that victimhood has basically been monetized into a social hedge fund.
It sounds like he's describing, emotional patent trolling. Like you don't actually create anything of value, you just claim ownership of a grievance and sue society for the social settlement.
That is an incredibly apt analogy. He argues that modern women can gain social capital, academic leniency, financial settlements, and immense cultural power through claiming victimhood. He posits this is the exact same underlying mechanism as their grandmothers gaining social standing through a prestigious marriage.
Right.
The vehicle has changed from matrimony to grievance, but the hypergamic instinct to climb the social ladder by extracting resources remains identical.
To really drive this home, Riker makes some truly extreme historical comparisons. He compares modern campus culture and Title IX tribunals directly to the 1692 Salem witch trials and to the 1980s McMartin preschool satanic panic.
It's a bold claim.
Very. Let's dissect the mechanics of that analogy. How does a 17th century witch trial actually map onto a modern university?
Well, it's a very deliberate rhetorical strategy centering on the concept of evidence. In Salem, the courts accepted spectral evidence, meaning if a teenage girl claimed the spirit of a witch attacked her in a dream,
Right.
that invisible, unverifiable vision was enough to hang someone. The accusation itself was the proof.
Wow.
Riker is arguing that in a modern Title IX tribunal, the concept of lived experience functions exactly the same way. The accusation is treated as unquestionable truth, and any attempt by the accused man to demand cross-examination or verifiable evidence is treated as a secondary assault, or essentially heresy.
He backs this up with high-profile cultural touchstones, where the narrative outpaced the truth. He spends time on the Ducal Cross case, where players were falsely accused by Crystal Mangum. Riker notes that even after the players were totally exonerated and the prosecutor was disbarred, the players still face backlash today.
Yeah.
They host due process charity tournaments, and feminist groups still boycott them annually.
He uses this to say, look, even in total legally documented vindication, the stigma remains, which he says proves the system is about maintaining power, not pursuing justice. He also brings up Brian Banks, the high school football star who lost his dream of playing in the NFL due to a false accusation.
That case was wild.
Banks spent years in prison before his accuser was caught on tape admitting she fabricated the entire story.
He also mentions the mattress girl at Columbia University, Emma Solkovich. She carried a mattress around campus for 9 months, earning art credits, accusing a man of rape. But Riker points out that the university cleared the man, and text messages surface showing she enthusiastically pursued him after the alleged event. Yet she received a New York Times feature, attended the State of the Union address, and gained widespread acclaim.
Riker uses these specific examples to show how the grievance industry rewards the accusation itself, regardless of the factual reality. The social patent troll gets paid, even if the patent is fake.
Which logically forces the next question. If this industry is so pervasive, and if high-profile cases like Duke Lacrosse and Mattress Girl are continually proven false, how does the narrative maintain its power? Why hasn't the market corrected itself?
Riker's answer is institutional capture. He argues the narrative doesn't have to be true because it is artificially propped up by a captured media and a compliant corporate establishment. He calls this segment 3 of his philosophy the media mindfuck.
He claims that the media is no longer engaged in reporting reality, but in narrative enforcement. He cites a UCLA study claiming that 97% of journalists lean left. He describes modern journalists not as objective reporters speaking truth to power, but as, quote, sensitivity readers with press badges who protect the grievance industry's investments.
He offers a critique of what he sees as massive historical and cultural revisionism. He directly attacks the New York Times' 1619 Project. The 1619 Project argued that America's true founding wasn't 1776, but the arrival of the first enslaved people, framing the entire American experiment through the lens of racial grievance.
Right.
Riker points out that despite severe public criticism from prominent mainstream historians who call the project's core claims factually unsustainable, the Times refused to retract it and kept the Pulitzer Prize.
For Riker, this proves his point perfectly. He views mainstream journalism as affirmative action for bad ideas. The truth of the history was secondary to the usefulness of the grievance narrative.
And he says it extends beyond the media into corporate America. He takes aim at woke human resources departments and diversity, equity, and inclusion DEI initiatives. To explain how HR functions, he uses a brilliant historical analogy, the Emperor Augustus's grain dole in ancient Rome.
Oh, the cura innone. Let's explain how this worked in Rome and how Riker maps it to the modern office.
So in ancient Rome, Augustus provided a massive subsidized ration of free grain to the citizens. It wasn't out of pure charity. It was a highly calculated political move to keep the populace pacified, fed, and distracted so they wouldn't riot or challenge his absolute authority.
Riker argues that corporate HR serves the exact same pacifying function today. They hand out sensitivity trainings, corporate jargon, and hollow diversity mandates to pacify men so they don't fight back against their own obsolescence.
Yeah.
He points out this glaring hypocrisy. While Fortune 500 boards and the actual mechanisms of corporate power remain 92% male, these same corporations fund HR departments that hire gender studies graduates to teach their male employees that masculinity itself is a disease. He says it's a systemic suppression tactic.
So if the media and the corporate world are entirely captured, what is his proposed solution? This is where Riker's strategies take a sharp turn into the realm of digital resistance and economic withdrawal. He urges his readers to adopt tactics that basically mirror Soviet samizdat.
Samizdat was the underground smuggling of banned literature in the Soviet bloc, right? People would type out banned books on carbon paper, copy by copy, and pass them around by hand to bypass state censors.
Exactly. Riker is advocating for a digital samizdat. He tells men to abandon legacy media entirely. Stop arguing with the New York Times on Twitter. Instead, he urges them to use the Brave browser to block corporate trackers.
Yep.
He tells them to use peer-to-peer protocols like BitTorrent to share information. He pushes them toward platforms like Rumble instead of YouTube, which he views as heavily censored. And most importantly, he tells them to fund dissenting creators directly. He wants men to build a parallel, decentralized information economy.
I want to look at the mechanics of this economic withdrawal. Does boycotting actually work according to the metrics Riker uses? We always hear about conservative boycotts, but we also talk about a corporate immune system that seems highly resistant to changing its progressive messaging, even when it loses money.
Well, Riker argues that economic withdrawal absolutely works, but it has to be ruthless. He brings up the Gillette Toxic Masculinity ad campaign from 2019 as his primary case study for this.
That was a massive cultural flashpoint. Gillette released a short film lecturing its core demographic, men, on toxic behavior, bullying, sexual harassment, essentially telling them to do better.
Yeah, and Riker points out the immediate financial fallout. Procter & Gamble, Gillette's parent company, took an $8 billion write-down shortly after that campaign.
$8 billion.
Wow. Meanwhile, a competitor, Harry's Razors, gained roughly 1 million new customers. Riker uses this to prove a fundamental economic reality. Men still control a massive portion of disposable income. When they coordinate and vote with their wallets, they can actually breach the corporate immune system.
He calls this strategy starving the beast, and the advice gets extremely granular here. He tells the reader to stop buying the $6 feminist-approved pumpkin spice latte from corporations that hate them. Switch to black coffee.
Simple as that.
Yeah. Then take that $5 or $6 a day savings and invest it into something tangible and sovereign. He suggests paying for blacksmithing classes, buying physical gold, purchasing rural land, stockpiling ammunition. The core tenet is stop funding the system that actively despises you and start funding your own physical and economic sovereignty.
It is a complete withdrawal of financial and attention capital from mainstream institutions. But Riker understands a critical flaw in simply dropping out. You can't just withdraw from society and expect to survive. You have to build yourself into something capable of existing outside the safety net.
Which brings us to the core of his self-improvement philosophy, the micro-level solution for the individual man. Having diagnosed the macro-level issues, the rigged marriage market, the grievance industry, the captured media, the book pivots to the individual.
Right, how does one man survive this?
Exactly. Riker's answer is a radical, unforgiving regimen of physical transformation and brutal self-accountability. He calls it the Spartan regimen and the OYS protocol.
OYS, standing for Own Your Shit. It is the ultimate audit of personal accountability. Riker claims that 83% of self-made millionaires log their daily habits and failures, while 88% of broke men consistently blame external forces. You know, the capitalist system, their ex-wives, the algorithm, their genetics.
He says the very first step to becoming sovereign is destroying what he calls the blame hydra.
I love that metaphor.
The blame hydra. It's great. In mythology, you cut off one head of the hydra and 2 more grow back. In Riker's world, you cut off one excuse like, my genetics make it hard to lose weight, and 2 more grow back, like, my gym is too far away and my job is too stressful.
Right, and to torch the Hydra, he argues you have to embrace physical suffering, specifically the iron. Lifting weights is not presented as a cosmetic hobby in this book. It is framed as a biological and psychological imperative.
Yeah, he cites data from the Journal of Applied Psychology, claiming that men who track their progress in the gym 5 times a week are 37% more likely to bench 225 pounds, close major business deals, and successfully retain custody of their children in court.
He is drawing a direct causal line between physical strength, testosterone production, and life outcomes. This forms the foundation of his wife reignition plan.
Which is fascinating because Riker posits that modern therapy culture has actively lied to men. Society tells men that real masculinity is about emotional vulnerability, about opening up and crying. But Riker argues that men don't actually respond to vulnerability with attraction.
No, he says they respond to physical dominance, competence, and stoic resolve. He is incredibly explicit about this. He writes that women do not orgasm to TED Talks on male vulnerability. Yeah, they crave the silent intensity of a man who can flip a 500-pound tractor tire before breakfast. And to back up this claim that physical dominance overrides social programming, he cites a rather shocking study from a 2021 Texas penitentiary.
Yes, let's look at the evolutionary psychology of this study. He claims the data showed that inmates with a 225-pound or heavier bench press received 83% more conjugal visits than weaker inmates.
83%. It is a brutal, primal metric. He uses a prison population because it strips away wealth, status, social media clout. In an environment reduced to pure biology, he argues physical dominance equals genetic currency. He wants men to realize that this primal dynamic operates beneath the surface of all human interaction.
And this ties directly into what he calls the anti-simp protocol. If you are doing the work, building your physical and mental value, you must stop freely giving your attention and resources to women who do not respect you. He ruthlessly exposes the orbiter economy of platforms like Twitch, OnlyFans, Instagram.
He cites Nielsen data showing that 73% of the men who financially bankroll these digital harems are between the ages of 18 and 35.
Prime years.
Exactly. These are prime reproductive and wealth building years that are being entirely hijacked by screens.
He tells the story of Tinder Tom. Tom is a forklift driver. He makes an honest blue-collar wage, but Tom blew $12,000 on a single cam girl who called him king and validated him on a screen. The second Tom's credit card declined, she blocked him.
Ouch.
Yeah, Tom currently lives in his Honda Civic.
Riker uses Tom to illustrate that simping, which is the act of overvaluing a woman and showering her with unearned resources, is essentially voluntary taxation. It's an evolutionary instinct to provide and protect a mate, but it has gone completely haywire in the digital age. The internet has hijacked a biological imperative and monetized it, extracting resources from lonely men and giving them literally nothing in return.
To combat this biological hacking, Riker suggests a daily journaling practice. But he aggressively rejects the modern therapeutic concept of a gratitude journal. He advocates for a war log. Let's analyze the psychological utility here. Is writing down your failures every single night just a form of mental self-flagellation, or does it actually work?
Well, Riker explicitly states that gratitude journals are for betas counting their participation trophies.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, the war log is designed to completely eliminate the ego. It revolves around his nightly Praxa check-in.
Right, the Praxa check-in is a brutal daily audit. Every night before you sleep, you have to answer 3 questions honestly. Lifted, led, or bitched.
Yeah.
And you score yourself from 0 to 3.
It forces a daily confrontation with objective reality. He shares the story of Mike, a divorcee who felt like he was constantly working on himself but getting nowhere. Mike started the war log. By tracking his time ruthlessly, Mike realized he spent 11,000 minutes in 1 year just scrolling through alpha male TikTok videos.
11,000 minutes.
Yeah, and when he did the math, that time equated to 547 skipped hour-long workouts.
Oh, man. So he thought he was absorbing masculinity, but he was actually just passively consuming it while his physical body atrophied.
Exactly. By auditing his failures like a cold, detached scientist rather than wallowing in them like a victim, Mike radically changed his behavior. The mental deadlifting builds the psychological calluses needed to ignore the modern world's digital pacifiers.
Okay, so let's follow Riker's progression. You have hit the iron, you have torched the blame Hydra, you have deleted OnlyFans and stopped funding the Simconomy. You are dominating your war log and holding yourself accountable. You are a physically and mentally strong individual.
But Riker says that is not enough.
Right. He argues that individual strength in isolation is useless against a coordinated system. A lone wolf is just a target.
Which brings us to the 5th major pillar of his philosophy, the Brotherhood Renaissance. Individual sovereignty must scale into collective defense.
Riker insists that men must rebuild exclusive, merit-based male networks if they want to survive the modern era. He roots this deeply in evolutionary biology. He argues that evolution hardwired male coalitions for survival. Men hunted the mammoth together, they defended the perimeter of the tribe together.
Right.
But he claims that modern corporate culture and DEI safe spaces have intentionally gutted these merit-based brotherhoods because they are inherently threatening to institutional control.
He points to the top echelons of modern power to prove his point. He claims that 83% of Fortune 500 CEOs belong to closed, highly exclusive networks, country clubs, elite military academies, secret societies, specific fraternities.
Yeah.
Riker argues these aren't just places to play golf. They are Darwinian proving grounds. They are spaces where weak ideas are aggressively called and competence is rewarded without concern for hurt feelings.
He takes the reader on this historical tour of how men used to organize to change the world. He references the 1717 Freemason revival, noting that men plotted the Enlightenment and multiple revolutions over single malt enclosed rooms.
Yeah.
He talks about medieval stonecutters, who formed fiercely guarded guilds to protect the geometry secrets that built Europe's cathedrals.
The 18th century London coffee houses are one of his favorite examples. They were entirely male spaces, often banning women outright. They were affectionately called penny universities because for a penny, a man could enter, drink coffee, and debate the greatest minds of the era.
And these exact male-only spaces birthed Lloyd's of London, the modern stock exchange, and fueled scientific breakthroughs. Riker contrasts this rich history of male collaboration with modern men, who he claims are so terrified of HR that they can't even host a book club without calling it a craft beer tasting to dodge campus censors.
The historical anecdote that I found most fascinating, because it cuts right to the core of his argument about merit over feelings, was the brewing guilds in Cologne, Germany.
Oh, yes. Riker notes that in 1456, the city of Cologne officially banned women from the brewing guilds. Now, a modern lens would view this simply as archaic sexism, but Riker explains the historical context.
Right. The ban wasn't rooted in a hatred of women. It was a pragmatic, desperately needed move to prevent physical riots. Disagreements over hop ratios, brewing techniques, and territory frequently escalated into violent brawls.
So the male-only guild was established as a rigid hierarchy to enforce order.
Precisely. He uses this historical footnote to argue that male-only spaces often prioritize function, output, and physical order over inclusivity or emotional comfort. He directly contrasts this historical pragmatism with modern corporate DEI workshops, which he claims prioritize trust falls and emotional safety over actual competence and loyalty.
The obvious problem for a man trying to build this today is that HR departments, social media mobs, and local governments are actively hunting down and dismantling exclusive, non-compliant male spaces. So how does Riker suggest building a tribe in a hostile environment?
Well, he introduces the concept of nomadic masculinity.
Nomadic masculinity.
Yeah, it's the realization that you cannot build a stationary, heavily defended fortress in enemy territory. The enemy has too many resources, they will eventually besiege it. You have to be mobile. He tells this hilarious but highly instructive story about his own father's poker night.
Oh, the U-Haul poker game? This was amazing. His dad's poker game used to be hosted in his suburban garage. But the local homeowners association, what Riker refers to as the neighborhood Karens, decided a group of men smoking cigars and playing cards was a public nuisance and shut it down using local bylaws.
So how did the men respond? They didn't hire a lawyer and fight the HOA in court, which would drain their resources. They pooled their money, rented a large U-Haul box truck, set up a folding table and chairs inside, and played their weekly poker game in the back while one of them drove the truck aimlessly around the neighborhood.
I mean, it is a brilliant guerrilla warfare approach to socializing. It was mobile, untraceable, completely beyond the jurisdictional reach of the HOA, and frankly, impossible to penalize.
It really is. Riker advises his readers to apply this nomadic principle digitally and physically. He tells men to form stealth networks, stop using Facebook groups, use burner phones, handle transactions in cash or Monero crypto wallets, and communicate exclusively on encrypted apps like Signal or Telegram. He wants men to create digital and physical wolf packs.
He points to the PayPal Mafia as the ultimate modern example of this.
The PayPal Mafia being the group of founders and early employees at PayPal. Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, Reid Hoffman, David Sachs. They went on to found Tesla, LinkedIn, YouTube, Yelp, Palantir. They essentially built the modern internet.
Right. Riker argues the PayPal Mafia operated exactly like a closed, ruthless male meritocracy. They shared insider hiring tactics, funneled venture capital to each other, and actively circumvented standard corporate diversity checklists to hire purely for obsessive talent.
Riker writes that they microdosed ambition and built billions of dollars of sovereign wealth, while the rest of Silicon Valley, like Google, was busy banning microaggressions.
But history shows that whenever these spaces are discovered by the mainstream, there is immediate pushback. How does Riker suggest his readers survive the inevitable cultural counterattack? Because he gives a very sobering example of the man cave in Portland.
Yeah, he does. A group of men in Portland tried to open a pop-up gym called the Man Cave. It offered heavy weights, a cigar room, axe throwing. It wasn't explicitly political, just a male-centric space.
And what happened?
It lasted exactly 24 hours before anarchists literally firebombed the building, citing it as a hub of toxic patriarchy.
Firebombed. So how do you defend against that level of hostility?
Riker's answer is expect it, screen for it, and absolutely never apologize. You don't try to reason with an ideological mob. Instead, you create barriers to entry so high that infiltrators naturally weed themselves out. He recounts a story of a feminist journalist attempting to infiltrate one of their underground Iron League powerlifting meets to write an expose.
And what did they do? Did they throw her out?
No, they didn't argue with her or cite their constitutional right to assembly. They simply handed her a Coors Light, smiled, and pointed her toward a 400-pound barbell, telling her it was her turn to squat.
Wow.
Yeah, the barrier to entry wasn't a debate. It was a physical reality she could not meet. She felt entirely out of place and left voluntarily within 10 minutes. The strategy isn't to fight the mainstream openly. It is to build a culture based on physical exertion or highly specialized knowledge that ideological tourists simply cannot endure.
So if we trace the arc of the book, we have gone from escaping the legal trap of marriage, to fighting the grievance media, to lifting heavy weights and auditing our failures,
Yeah.
to hiding in U-Hauls with crypto wallets. It paints a picture of a very capable, very stoic, but deeply cynical rogue operator.
Which is why the final segment of the book is so unexpected.
I have to say, this was the pivot I did not see coming at all. The ultimate culmination of Riker's philosophy moves beyond hiding your wealth, beyond physical dominance, beyond the digital wolf pack. It moves squarely into the realm of spiritual frame, religious submission, and building a lasting legacy.
This is the most fascinating sociological leap in the entire text. In most red pill or manosphere literature, there is a heavy, almost exclusive lean towards secular evolutionary biology. The worldview is usually highly atheistic.
Yeah.
But Riker explicitly argues that atheism is a massive strategic error.
He introduces the Ezekiel Protocol. Riker says that atheism isn't freedom, it's simply handing the keys of your psychological framework over to feminists and the state.
Yeah.
If you don't bow to a higher power, you will inevitably be forced to bow to the government.
He brings in macro-level data to support this claim. He cites the World Health Organization, noting that men in highly secular progressive countries, he points specifically to Sweden, kill themselves at 4 times the rate of men in highly religious traditional societies.
He argues that trading ancient scripture for modern secular humanism has left men completely unmoored, lacking purpose, and highly susceptible to despair.
And he hits the reader with biological and legal outcomes to back this up. This is where the synthesis of his arguments really solidifies. He cites Harvard biologists noting that atheist, secular men have an 18% lower sperm count than highly religious men.
Let's explain the underlying biological logic he uses to connect secularism to testosterone and sperm production. Riker argues the mechanism here is cortisol, the stress hormone.
Right. He claims that without the psychological safety net and the eternal perspective provided by a higher power, secular men exist in a state of chronic evolutionary anxiety. They are terrified of death, terrified of cancel culture, terrified of losing their status, and that chronic stress biologically suppresses their reproductive function. Religion acts as a physiological shield.
And the legal stats are even more stark. According to the National Parents Organization data he cites, atheist dads lose custody 70% of the time, compared to only 22% for religious fathers. Plus, kids raised with religious fathers in the home are 89% less likely to go to jail.
When you synthesize why a cynical red pill battlefield manual suddenly champions biblical submission, reading the Book of Proverbs and attending Sunday service, his logic becomes clear. Riker views religion through a strictly utilitarian evolutionary lens.
Religion is a survival mechanism.
Precisely. Religion is presented as the ultimate time-tested tool for frame control, marital stability, and institutional defiance. Think about it from the perspective of the family court system he despises. A judge might look at a secular man quoting internet philosophers as a flight risk or a danger.
Right.
But that same judge looks at a church deacon quoting Deuteronomy with a congregation behind him as a stable pillar of the community. Riker is telling men to use the ancient architecture of faith to protect their assets, retain custody of their children, and safeguard their bloodline.
He contrasts this religious framework with modern progressive parenting. He brings up Phil Robertson, the patriarch from the television show Duck Dynasty. Robertson is a deeply religious, traditional man. Riker points out that Robertson has 25 grandchildren, all of whom can skin a deer, build a fire, and run a business by age 12.
And he contrasts that generational tribal success with his own secular neighbor. Riker writes that his neighbor tried inclusive, gender-neutral parenting, which resulted in a teenage son who attends furry meetups in animal costumes and a daughter who communicates almost entirely through Minecraft servers.
Wow.
Yeah, Riker uses this to argue that if you don't provide a rigid religious framework for your children, the culture will happily provide a degenerate one for them.
Riker's ultimate goal for a man is building a personal legion. He says having 10 loyal men in your church pew who would bury bodies for you is worth infinitely more than having 10,000 followers on Instagram.
He uses the Roman emperor Marcus Aurelius as the ultimate architect, a man who journaled stoically by candlelight to maintain his sanity while ruling a crumbling empire, dealing with plagues and barbarian wars. Riker contrasts Aurelius with the modern secular man, whom he pictures crying into an oat milk latte over the emotional labor of answering a work email.
But looking at the entirety of the Ezekiel Protocol, we have to ask a critical question about intent. Is Riker asking his readers to genuinely find faith, to have a real transformative relationship with God? Or is he simply instructing them to weaponize the structure of religion to beat the family court system and enforce traditional gender roles in their homes?
It reads like Machiavellian Christianity. He cites a Match.com survey showing that 68% of corporate boss babes secretly dream of a trad husband. A traditional man who works on cars and fixes the plumbing, not a man who wants to process their emotions.
Right.
He explicitly tells men to go to church, not necessarily to save their eternal souls, but because, quote, the altar is cheaper than divorce court.
Wow. It's an adoption of the form of religion, because the function produces higher survival rates in the matrix he's described. It is a fascinating, if highly cynical, synthesis of ancient hierarchy applied as a modern survival mechanism.
Yeah, it really is.
Okay, let's take a breath and summarize the incredible, extensive territory we've just mapped out in Conrad Reicher's Redpilled Men's Guide to DGAF, OYS, and self-improvement.
We covered a lot of ground today.
We really did. We started by diagnosing the economic trap of the marriage plantation and the cold biological reality of hypergamy and the Tinder algorithm. We dismantled the grievance industry, exploring how false accusations function as social patent trolling. We looked at digital samizdat and the $6 latte boycott as a way to starve the woke media propaganda machine.
Then we moved inward, forging iron discipline through the Spartan regimen, bench pressing 225 pounds to torch the blame Hydra, and tracking failures in the OIS war log.
Right. We expanded outward again to build underground, untraceable brotherhoods in U-Hauls. And finally, we arrived at the Ezekiel Protocol, the weaponization of the religious framework to ensure a lasting, sovereign legacy.
It is a comprehensive, meticulously argued, and highly provocative architecture for completely opting out of mainstream modern society and building a parallel, fortified structure.
It really is. And once again, we highly recommend that if you want to dig into this raw, unfiltered worldview yourself, you must check Amazon Kindle and Google Playbooks to buy the ebook. See the citations, read the stories of Dave's offshore LLCs and Tinder Tom for yourself.
And we strongly encourage you to follow the author, at Conrad Reicher, at Substack, to see how this philosophy evolves in real time.
Definitely. And if you found value in this objective mapping of a controversial topic, please hit that like and subscribe button. It helps us keep diving deep.
Before we sign off, I want to leave you with a final, lingering question to mull over. It builds on everything Reicher has argued today, but introduces a new angle for you to consider on your own.
What is the final thought?
Reicher argues convincingly that modern institutions are just invisible contracts designed to extract your resources. But if you follow this manual to the letter, if you aggressively walk away from all of society's established contracts, marriage, corporate HR, mainstream media, traditional socializing, do you truly become a sovereign man?
Or do you just end up building a brand new matrix of your own making, completely isolated in a fortress of your own design, who ultimately benefits from a society where every man is a heavily armed island?
Does the fortress eventually become a prison?
That is a brilliant question to end on. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We will see you next time.